The African American community stood up again for me. You've always had my back, and I'll have yours.
Policy that will benefit black people will benefit all of society. Let's be clear about that. Let's really be clear about that. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No, because whatever benefits that black family will benefit that community and society as a whole and the country.
Look at what they value and look at their budget and what they're proposing. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
All right. Get into it, y'all. So, welcome to the show today. We greatly appreciate you. You know, it's been a little while since I've seen everybody. And it's kind of crazy because alone, solo, dolo, it's a different vibe, right? I know all of you are used to seeing me and the brothers together. That's typically how we do things. But today we got to talk about something specific that I don't think I've gotten to talk, you know, a solo dolo, one-on-one. And so we're going to do that today. So we had little technical issues. I appreciate y'all's patience. It's just me and I'm figuring everything. Sometimes get a little blustery, but we're going to have a good time. So if you can hear me, drop something in the comment. If you can't, that's okay too. We're going to figure it out. You just see my lips moving like, I don't know what you're doing. But today we need to have a discussion regarding what is going on with the presidential campaigns that have kicked off for 2024. You know, it's really interesting because most people are not really paying a whole lot of attention to what's going on. And right now we're in the primaries. We're in the, how we call the time where all the candidates fighting within each party are vying for each other's party's attention. And they're competing through the primaries and the different competitions in different states. And it's led to a lot of interesting conversation around if some of these candidates are even viable. One thing that's really interesting is that if you speak to most people right now, they would say, you know, there's nothing going on, right? There's not a lot of national attention on the Biden versus Trump thing, which is what everyone expects to come to the forefront. And as you've seen in that video clip I opened with, what we really have right now is less Biden versus Trump and more Trump versus himself in court in all of his legal issues he's had, and more Biden versus his history in terms of his son and what he has and hasn't gotten done over this presidential cycle he's been in office. And one thing that's been for sure is that Kamala Harris has not been super present in all of this discussion and in a lot of these spaces until now. As we know, when this first started out, Kamala was a big deal, right? She was the black, honestly, she was kind of the black token. She was the one that represented more ascension for the black community in the sense that she came into place to be the black VP and she was a woman, right? And this was supposed to be off the heels of Obama, right? So we had a black president. We also had a black VP. So everybody's happy right now, right? Well, not everybody. So today's discussions around how the black community is receiving the Biden White House for a potential rerun of this competition that happened in 2020 of Biden versus Trump. And where does everyone sit right now? How do people feel about it? Are people really out here ready to go to the polls for Biden, ready to go to the polls for the Democrats? Or are we really facing a crisis? A lot of people are saying we're facing a crisis because nobody want to vote for either one of these people. And that's understandable. I mean, I'm not here to tell you to vote for Trump. Let's be clear. You may think that because I have spoken on different issues regarding the Democrats that I'm trying to push people toward Trump or toward the Republicans. Believe me, that is not the case here, people. I promise you. I think that the critical thinking that we need to exercise in order to have a constructive, productive, and fruitful outcome from the election cycle is not being exercised well enough. It doesn't mean we can't vote Democratic. It doesn't mean we don't vote Joe Biden. It means that we demand um, in return for our vote something that's specific for us. And I think a lot of people are starting to get that everywhere from a Killer Mike all the way down. And shout out to him. Unfortunately, he did get arrested at the awards show the other day. I hate to hear that after he got a couple Grammys. I'm sorry, I don't follow pop. I don't know what award he got. I apologize, but he got a few awards, and the man got arrested. But shout out to him and everybody else who's been kind of speaking out. I mean, even Charlemagne the God. But Charlemagne's more on that. Honestly, he's kind of playing a double side, and you've seen in the video, Charlemagne. You seen in the opening video, Charlemagne got hit with that, the classic that everyone loved listening to. You ain't black if you ain't gonna vote for me. You don't know if you're black if you aren't already planning to vote for me. It's not a good thing to hear. It's not a good thing. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a multi-step approach. What I want to do is I want to base our discussion around a podcast that I recently listened to. Podcasts are really great because you can digest them in the car when you're working out in every place, other places, and you don't have to deal with the video component of what's happening. So YouTube app actually allows you to listen to just the audio only while you have your phone screen shut off if you have YouTube Premium. I don't know if they do it for the free version, but I have Premium, and so I can do that. But we're not doing that today. We're going to actually listen to NPR's politics podcast. It's only going to be we're going to listen about 12 minutes of it or so. The point here is that I'm going to interject with some comments because it cannot be understated how critically crazy this situation is, and the left or the more liberal or somewhat centered media does a great job with the Democratic campaigns in illustrating how crazed they are for the black vote. And as you've seen in the opening video, Biden knew that the black vote was critical to his win, and we all knew that. And now here we are again, and that's part of why South Carolina was the first state in the Democratic primary series, right? Because they wanted to highlight, two reasons. There's two reasons. One, they wanted to highlight that they want to highlight the idea to the black community that they were important. So they said that they would make a state that was significant in the last election cycle for black votes making a difference. They want to highlight that state as being important by making it first. But more importantly, from a strategic standpoint, the reason that they did that was so that they could truly set a tone for the country that Biden is a viable candidate. They want to start out showing that this candidate's a winning candidate, that he is still in this race, that he is still, despite his age, despite things that have happened over the past couple of years, he is still the person of choice for the Democratic side. And they use the black vote to do that. As we know, black people have been we are pace setters. We are trendsetters. We are the ones who elect and make kings. We are kingmakers in this country. And it's kind of crazy to be kingmakers, but not be kings ourselves. That's going to be a whole different discussion. I'm going to get into that. I got the data for you today because it has to be understood that we are the ones who stand to lose the most every election cycle going forward from today. And we are the ones who could who actually could gain the most if we wield our vote wisely. But that being said, let's talk about this. Let's go into this podcast. So let me go ahead and get this pulled up for us. I got like 15 screens. Most screens should be available to me, but please don't hold it against me. And shout out to Stedman. Appreciate you, bro. He is in the building, in the audience. All right, so let's go ahead and share something. We are going to share NPR podcasts regarding Mr. Biden here. I'm going to throw it on our screen over here, right? Just so y'all can see that, okay? And we're going to listen to a little bit of it. And you're going to enjoy this as much as I enjoyed it. Because it's very entertaining, unfortunately. And it's not supposed to be entertaining, y'all. It's not supposed to be entertaining. I'm telling you, it's not supposed to be entertainment. So, if you have any issues with the audio, let me know. But we should be good to go. So we're going to play it. I'm going to stop in between a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to give you some comments. And then we're going to come out of this and talk about really where we are. And I've already started it in a little bit, so let's start from where we are and let's listen.
Interestingly, I mean, look, we've covered a lot of elections together, and I have to tell y'all that it didn't really feel like election season when I was in South Carolina. Driving through the state with our All Things Considered team, I didn't see a lot of yard signs or billboards. There were some ads on TV, but it wasn't that huge influx that we've all sort of come to expect. I mean, part of that, of course, is due to the fact that the state holds its primaries in different dates. Democrats held theirs on Saturday, Republicans will have theirs in just a few weeks. But it did feel a little surprising. And there were some people I talked to that even 48 hours, 24 hours away from the Democratic primary didn't know who all was on the Democratic ballot other than Joe Biden. And some were still making up their minds as to who they were going to vote for.
So, Asma, black voters get a lot of attention in South Carolina because South Carolina propelled President Biden to the nomination in 2020, and black voters in particular were a big part of that. You were there with President Biden, I guess, about a week and a half ago?
Yeah, the weekend prior.
Yeah. And here's the President of the United States campaigning in a state that as we just said, was not particularly contested. So can you explain what's going on there?
This is the question I've had on my mind a lot, I will say, for the last month, because we've seen a number of administration folks, surrogates, travel down to South Carolina. The vice president, the first lady, the second gentleman, Biden himself was down there multiple times. And you wonder, well, why? Because South Carolina is not a competitive primary, and there is nobody who reasonably expects that a Democrat will win the state in a general election. And my sense of this was that it was messaging. It was partly that the Democratic Party wanted to show that they are invested. Biden himself advocated that South Carolina should get bumped up to the front of the calendar. I also think that there have been a lot of questions from outside the administration about how strong Biden's support is from black voters. In fact, I talked about this with a guy, Terrence Woodbury. He's with Hit Strategies. He pays attention, focuses a lot on where black voters are. And he told me this.
We see that generation gap between older and younger voters in every race, but it has been very and much more concentrated in the Black community. And so I do think that is going to continue to be a primary priority for the Biden campaign. And that's what they're going to be looking at in South Carolina. Are they moving those numbers specifically with Black men and with Black voters under the age of 50?
So
Okay, so let's take a second there. What's really interesting here to recognize is that they recognize black men right out the gate. All right, that's one thing. The other thing is that, like I spoke about earlier, they understand that South Carolina can set a tone for not only the black community's perception of how we really truly feel, but also the nation and people as a whole in this country. And what's interesting about this is that the turnout for the primary in South Carolina was not really that great, honestly speaking. So it's not really representative of a whole lot of people, but for the people who showed up, they brought it home for Biden without a question. But as you heard them say, they're not even really expecting to take South Carolina in the general election. They just needed to do something, and the black community delivered, because there is something that is going on, and that program has already started with Kamala Harris. She's made a lot of inroads in the state of South Carolina, and you probably have seen it on TikTok and Instagram. She has been relaunched and almost rebranded to get out here and to ensure that South Carolina was delivered. And she's continuing on a parade around the country, not only to each state as the primaries and caucuses occur, but she needs to get out there and not only bring in the white women with the abortion, but she also needs to get the entire black community. And what tactics do you think she's going to use to do that? She's going to bring a lot of the Obama playbook style. She's going to bring a lot of that to get to the millennials and the Gen Xers. But the Gen Z, the young guys that we're going to hear about in this podcast, are really the critical ones she wants to continuously push the shift with, because there is a rumor afoot that she might try to do this again herself in 2028. Now, we've already heard other rumors, right? There's been rumors that Kamala is actually going to move in and take Biden's place because he's going to have some health issue before the general election. And so then all that fury is going to be put right behind her. They can't do it right now, because if they knew Kamala was the one, then they probably all run away. But if you catch them at the last minute when they have no other options and the primaries are over or something, maybe they can do something. There's one theory. The other theory I heard was Michelle Obama coming in and trying to replace, or them setting up somebody else to pop in at the last minute. Somebody's coming in either before the primaries are over or right after he gets elected. He's going to have some health issue, and here we go. Those are rumors. But right now, what's important is to get Black folks back on the bus, so to speak. And this is what they're doing to do that. So let's listen to a little bit more.
I will say, I think there was a desire to kind of quiet some of that criticism. But at the same time, Terrence told me, and maybe Juana, you have a sense of this, that the folks who vote in a South Carolina primary are your traditional establishment, always voters.
Right.
They're not the low propensity voters that are actually the ones that are ringing alarm bells in these polls.
Yeah, I heard a lot of the same things when I was talking to state elected officials and strategists who work in the state of South Carolina. And one of the things that they pointed out that kind of dovetails with that, I was talking to State Representative Campbell Garvin, who is a young Democratic representative himself. He's in his early 30s. And he was telling me when we met with him in Blythe, South Carolina, that he doesn't see the president's challenges about his agenda or his record. It's how the campaign communicates that. He says that he does believe that the Biden campaign does have challenges really attracting people like himself, a young Black Southern male, but he thinks that it's really about figuring out how to tell that story and how to reach those voters where they are. And that probably means not on NPR, not on cable news, getting online, meeting them in the ways that they're communicating and they're getting their information.
Well, and you were particularly focused during your trip on young Black voters, interviewing them in various locations. What did you hear from them about what they care about? What issues are motivating them in this election year?
So the first thing I will say is that no matter whether the young Black voters we talk to plan to support the president and Vice President Harris or not, there was a big distaste for the political climate right now. People do not like sort of the vitriol that they are hearing. And another thing that we heard repeatedly is that no one is particularly psyched for a potential rematch between President Biden and former President Trump. So there were a couple of issues that kept coming up over and over again when we asked these young voters. The first one was college affordability and student debt. Lots of people cared deeply about that in that under 35 set. We also heard a lot of talk about abortion. Multiple people brought up to us the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. Healthcare broadly came up, access to healthcare, things like being able to afford healthcare. And then the other thing that came up often, particularly among people who said that they were members of a union, was the issue of workers' rights.
So, Juana, if you gave me that list.
All right. So let's talk about a few of those real quick. So we said workers' right. We talked about healthcare. Those two things and the other things that are going to get mentioned here. It's very interesting already that we're not hearing anything really niched and specific to Black community, right? Nothing that is specific to us has been spoken on yet. But could you ask yourself this, could you say that any other person of any other race could ask for the same thing? Could they come up and have the same things come out of their mouth for the most part? There's no reason that they couldn't. There's no specificity in it that would exclude them. They would have a similar stake in some of these topics that they're asking for right now. Think about that. We'll get to that.
That issue set, I would say, wow, Joe Biden has these voters wrapped up based on all of his policies, all of the things that he has worked on, the things that he's put a lot of emphasis on, like helping with student debt, putting his support quite visibly with striking workers over the last year, focused on healthcare in many ways, et cetera, et cetera. So how did these voters feel about President Biden?
So it's not always the case that their support lines up for him as naturally as one might think, given the list of issues that we've been talking about. And I want to introduce you guys to one voter that I met. He was still undecided, and he told me that he was open to voting for candidates in either the Democratic primary on Saturday or the Republican one in a couple of weeks. His name is Tamondre Robinson. He's 24 years old, currently a student at Midlands Technical College. And when I asked him about the issues he cared about, he named the exact things we've been talking about. College affordability and healthcare were at the top of his list. But he also told me a big issue for him was character and unity.
Am I looking at a person for their character? Does character truly change America, or does good policy change America? None of those questions are being answered. It's just choose me, no choose me. So it's complicated.
Juana, did
choose me, no, choose me. So it's complicated. Am I choosing someone based on character or good policy to make America better? So let's think about America for a second. Are we as a people wholly concerned with America? Definitely. We should be. America is where we live. This is where we are. This is our ground. This is our country. We are part of the fabric. And we, as I said earlier, are kind of kingmakers in this country. But is that the crux of the decision to be made in such an important election? These things, again, I spoke on. These are things that anybody could say. Like, healthcare. Everybody can complain about healthcare. We've been overcharged for healthcare since healthcare started. College. We already know the college situation is a big scam. Whether you got colleges gouging students or you got the loan companies, the private ones especially, coming after you for your house and your car. These are not untypical things across the American spectrum. And so we do have to ask, if we do these things and we look and know that there's a big gap between us as the Black community versus the rest of the society in terms of some of the biggest health, wealth, and well-being metrics. When we do that Obama thing, which is what a rising tide lifts all boats, are we going to be risen up to where we should be relative to everyone else? And you know why that's important? Because if we understand that the problems we have are germane to our relative disparity to the rest of society, then we understand that our first and foremost problem is closing the disparity. And that disparity in and of itself doesn't mean that all these issues from college, healthcare, and character of the president go away. It means now it's an even playing field for all of the citizens, relatively speaking. And now we all can go for that rising tide lifts all boats. Now we can all go for universal policies that help everyone based on class metrics rather than lineage back to systemic undercutting and systemic oppressions and other things that were pitted directly at a specific people. We can get to business as we want to believe it to be as usual. Business as usual will be no specificity in the laws outside of the class and economic cut points that, the bureaucrats would be able to draw from the data. But right now, there's a bigger gap than that exists between us and the rest of our fellow citizens. And I don't know that that's rising to the consciousness of many Gen Z. I think that if the younger folks are not feeling that, they're going to feel it when they get older. Because if we don't fix it now as millennials or even Gen Xers, if we don't start to help teach and pass along the understanding of how the world truly is and how they ended up where they are or the things that they're facing, then history is bound to repeat itself, right? But let's continue with you a little bit more of this.
Did he say where he gets a lot of his information from? This is like one of the perennial questions I've had about voters is where do you get your bits of political news from?
Yeah, he, like a lot of the young people we talk to, is extremely online, getting almost
Yeah.
all of his information from social media, some news websites, but social media was the big thing that kept coming up. All of these voters that we talked to were talking about the messages that they were seeing on Instagram
Mm.
Reels and on TikTok.
I guess the reason I was asking, Juana, is it seems like it's really hard to break through with messaging for any campaign, for any candidate, if a lot of voters are getting their messages
Yeah.
from self-selected groups that are going to reinforce what they're already thinking, or from like friends or friends of friends. And I don't think that this is unique to Biden, but he is like a candidate of the times in which so many voters now get their information that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I fully appreciate that challenge for President Biden's campaign. But for candidates running for any office, it's really hard to break through. I spoke to some Democratic strategists in the state as well, and they were telling me that's why it's so important to invest in local validators. It's powerful when you see, for example, like a young Black person on Instagram talking about why this election matters to them and why there's a choice. And that's going to go a lot farther than, say, an ad on cable news telling people why they should support President Biden and Vice President Harris. So it is really tricky. And I think it's going to be interesting to see as the campaign moves into the Super Tuesday states, as we focus on the general election, what kind of new tools these campaigns use to reach a voter group that is notoriously hard to message to.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, more on what we can learn from the South Carolina primary.
The following message.
Okay. So there's a lot there. And I think that understanding that social media is going to be a big element to getting through to the newer voters out here it's a fair point, and I can't be upset about that, and no one should be. I'm not that guy. I don't get a lot of it from just basically like TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but I mean I watch YouTube and I watch CNN. Actually, I'm still old school. I'm kind of old school. You see, I got these gray hair, so I'm actually watching. Like I remember when I got cable when I moved to Michigan. I got cable and I had to upgrade to the next package up because I wanted CNN. It was so crazy. That was the number one reason I got cable television when I moved to Michigan, was because I needed CNN. I'm like, I gotta stay in the know what's going on, and that's so crazy, ain't that? Because we don't want to watch CNN now. CNN is just lying and misleading you. Yeah. So I don't have cable anymore. But the point still stands that it is important for people to get the message out to them. But if that message is misleading them intentionally, then, that's a problematic message. So Biden's efforts to get through this are going to be remarkable. And I'm going to finish off this little podcast segment, jumping ahead a little bit here to just close this out. And we're going to start talking about some important points relative to what's going on and how we're going to end up in the wrong location come November if we don't start having a real discussion about this situation. So let's go ahead and finish this one up, and then we're going to get into some discussion. I invite people to call in and give their opinion.
Institutions and nonprofits turn to regions.
Tested. So what can we, if at all, learn from the primary? Juana, you have spoken to people from the Biden campaign and inside the Biden cinematic universe. What do they think should be taken from this?
It's so funny. I was talking to someone who is not affiliated with the campaign, but is a Democrat who was organizing young voters in particular in the state of South Carolina in the week leading up to the election. And I asked them this exact question. Okay, I take that it is a largely uncontested primary. So what should I be watching? What are the lessons we
Yeah.
learn? And this was Cliff Albright, the executive director of Black Voters Matter. He told me, I don't think you should take much away from this at all. There's not another thing on the map, on the calendar that we can compare this to. So there's not much to say. And he said it's kind of funny, he's a group that focuses on Black voters and he's saying, don't pay much attention here. But he said that we shouldn't make much of it. And when I talked to the campaign, when I talked to other national Democrats, they said something similar. They expected the president to win. That happened. They were able to test out some messaging to Black voters and to show the nation the importance that the president and the Democratic Party put on Black voters, those same voters who really breathed life into his campaign in 2020 when things were not looking great for Biden. But there's not much more to it than that, in their opinion.
I went back in history and I was like, okay, what would be the closest analogous year? Okay, 2012, when former President Obama was running for re-election. What was turnout in 2012 in the Democratic presidential primary in South Carolina? There wasn't one.
Because he was completely
He was completely uncontested.
Yeah.
So, Asma, we have been talking about the challenges that the Biden campaign has in communicating about what the president has done in a way that people will take on board and say, thank you, Joe Biden. Do you have a sense of what the Biden campaign is trying to do?
There is a belief that they need to go out and more effectively message on some of the quote wins that he has had, right? I hear specifically around messaging on the economy. I think the challenge is that, take a message like this Bidenomics phrase that they've had for a really long time. I mean, I did a story on this months and months ago that it wasn't resonating. Some folks would say it is resonating in some ways, but what does it mean? And I think the real big challenge is that it is such a vague word that incorporates people's perceptions of all things on the economy. And some folks are still frustrated that prices are high.
Yes, people are still frustrated. So we can stop there for this one. There's more that they speak on and get into, but I think the gist of it is pretty clear. There's a couple things. One, South Carolina meant it was almost a nothing burger in the grand scheme of things. It was really a dog and pony show for the Black community. It was to bring out the old guard of the Black community and some of the new folks, get them excited about Biden Harris, and use that as visual aid to drive the rest of the base, the black base, to turn out, or at least to stay on the blue bus, right? That's really what this was about. It has nothing to do with actually gaining votes, or trying to make a difference, or trying to communicate anything strongly. They knew that they didn't have anything there. They knew they didn't have anything there. There's nothing to take away from it, and so it was a big exercise. But the question that we have to answer today is how this flimflam that they're architecting using South Carolina, and that they will continue to do in other places and other things, from Kamala showing up at schools to Biden, showing up in people's homes. We done seen videos of Biden with he was at some single father's home, brought them some cookout, and didn't eat any of the cookout, of course, that they actually had cooked, and and was sitting around the table doing what? He was doing the exact pandering that we have come to accept as being hearing us. And I think that basic optics game is what's led us into a complacency that a good swath of older voters have told us that we need to do what's right, and what's right is to vote blue because of what's shown in that video at the beginning. You vote blue no matter who, or you get put back in chains, right? People feel less threatened under Biden because of his benign neglect policy being quiet, because of his intentionality of leaving us, an intentionality of not doing specific policy for us. It's very, very quiet. So if you remember back, there was a Zoom call that went viral by The Intercept. It was actually put out by The Intercept, and it was Biden with civil rights leaders. And in that famous video that I don't think got enough, it definitely did not get enough airtime. Biden basically told these civil rights leaders, these black civil rights leaders who were asking for things, not really the right things, but they were asking for things. He said, hey, y'all not getting nothing. You just going to understand that the Hispanics are coming, and they are going to take over the majority of the population, or they're going to make whites at least the minority. White will no longer be the majority population of this country. And you're going to have to just shut up and deal with it. You're going to have to get along with them. It was almost like you're going to be prepared to get replaced. He was saying that right there at Kamala, sitting at her desk, listening to it all, dead silent, still as a ice cube. This shows you that, people understand that the Republicans will be very blunt with you and upfront, and they will tell you that they're not going to do it. In fact, they will get laws on the books to prevent you from doing it, as in Florida. But then when you look at the Democrats, there's always these excuses. There are always these things that they have to give a reason why they can't do something. Even during Obama's early years, he had more leverage than he did later on. And he was coming up with reasons. Don't even get into the Ta-Nehisi Coates conversation, or when the civil rights leaders went to the White House to speak with him and ended out in the cold. Don't get into any of that stuff, because all of that is just more evidence of the same. And I'm not here to tell people, no, don't vote Democrat. What I'm saying is that they are able to do these things because we vote without demanding what we should get in return. Every bit of what they say has been lip service and distraction. Y'all can go all the way back to Hillary Clinton with the hot sauce. This stuff is going back and forth all the time. They employ even black agents whom we think we can trust to soothe our concerns. And they do that by exploiting our shared connection. They exploit our shared connection, and they turn that into a way to persuade us to concede that our best option is to go with the least of two evils. But there is no dimension, there's no discussion about negotiating what we need for ourselves. So let's get into something that's really important. Let's talk about, why do we even need something for ourselves? Let me add something here to the video. Let's look at this. Let's look at some data. I am going to come back and edit the live description videos on YouTube and on Facebook and various other locations with the links to this data. But this is coming from various locations, such as, actually, I have it pulled up. I will tell you right now. I will pull up the charts in their raw form over here, so I can tell you exactly where either of these data points come from. So this first one here, which has to do with the average student loan debt, comes from Bankrate. Bankrate.com. They talk about a lot of things related to the economy and loans and cards and things of this nature. And so it's of their interest to talk about the loan industry regarding student loans. So they have this data here, and it shows the average student loan debt, right? And so what you see is, and I know these are actually very small, so I apologize. But what you're looking at is on the far left is the black bar. That shows a student loan debt for the average Black student of $53,000. This was at the time of them taking this data. White is $46,000. Next is Hispanic, which is the smallest bar at $26,000. And then the average of those three is about $36,000. So the average really is a little under 36. This is not a properly weighted average across the entire population. So don't take it explicitly for as shown in terms of the numbers, but do understand that these relationships generally are true. Black people carry the highest student loan debts, period. Understand that. Now also understand that with that being said, if you come in with a universal policy that says we're going to cut $10,000 off of everyone's student loan debt, if you make under 100 grand a year, for instance, you'll see that everybody drops the same amount. But if you think about one other thing, and let's look at this other chart here, household wealth. That same family that you just cut $10,000 of student loan debt for is a family that has, I can't even, 4 to 5 times, forget it, 10 times more household wealth than the Black community. So you might be thinking, oh, wow, we got a similar level of debt as white folks. It's not a big deal. We're about the same. Give us both 10 grand. I'll be all right. It's not that big of a gap. The problem becomes that when you see that they have this much more equity, they're just taking freebies now. They could have paid off their loan a lot sooner. They're just taking freebies. You needed it. And that's why the other metrics are going to see, especially when it comes to, that's why the home ownership metric of actually owning a home is lower in our community as well. That can make an impact. Some people just choose not to pay on their loans. I'll be straight with you. There are a lot of people who's like, no, F these loans. I'm not paying them. I get it. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your money. I'm not here to tell you what to do for your credit. So people are trying to work around that stuff. But it is interesting to understand that you're not dealing with people who don't have money. We don't have money. Folks who you're also giving it to have money. They have wealth. They may not want to cash it in, but they got something. Okay. So keep that in mind. This is not the same story between us and them. But also, the big point you need to understand is that when we go back to the average student loan debt, it's not about us versus just white. It's us versus the average. This is the average person, just in general. Even outside of these numbers, you can go and Google it all day. The average student loan debt is about $30,000. We're at 53 solid. We're in the 50s, no questions asked. So with that being the case, we have a case of question. Why is our student loan debt higher? I wonder why. Let's look at another chart. People often, and this one's a little hard to see, so I'm going to actually blow it up. So people often discuss this concept of, well, we're doing better than we have before. We're getting better. Things are getting better. Okay. So if you look at this, white and Asian households have vastly more wealth than other households. What we see is that the change from 2019 to 2021 for the Black community was 77%. There's a 77% increase in wealth median for U.S. households that were Black from 19 to 21. That sounds great, right? Okay, 77%. And they didn't increase that much. They increased only about 23%. So what happens is we get caught up in this idea that we're getting a better outcome under an administration or under a situation that's less toxic in a in our face type of way. It's less in our face toxic. But as you can see, basically, even with us getting 77%, it's nowhere near anyone else. And you still also have to ask the question of how Hispanic median wealth positions are higher than us. And he just said that they're increasing in numbers. And so you got a lot more people who are on the lower end because they just came in the door in the Hispanic community than we should even have because we've been here. Yet, even with that wider spectrum of lower income people coming into this country who are identifying as Hispanic, they still have moved the median, not the average. Average, the average can get skewed. We're talking about the median. They moved that median way up past us. So we have to ask again, how is this so that the Black situation is worse than Hispanic? And also, how is it so that we think a rising tide, a universal policy across the board without specificity, is going to somehow benefit Black folks in a way that's going to close the gap between white, Black, and then when you look at Hispanic, their issue typically is that they're just new to the country, but they've shown you that they can catch up and start moving. They're going to keep moving. So really, this is a Black issue. This is not just a people who just got here or low income people issue. But let's look at another chart. Let's look at that home ownership rate I spoke about earlier, right? Home ownership, as you can see, and let me move myself because I'm in your way. Home ownership for the Black folks is at 44%. That's the bar on the far left. Okay. This came from the Realtor Resource Group, NAR. They put this out. Oh, let me double check. Their release was in March 2nd, 2023. So this is National Association of Realtors data here. But 44% for Blacks, 73% for white. Hispanic is at 50%. And then that puts the average around 66%. People, come on. Remember when Kamala said in that video that I played at the beginning of this that any policy that's good, she said it wrong, but what she said verbatim is that any policy that's good for the Black community be good for the entire nation. What she meant to say is that any policy that's good for the entire nation will be good for Black people. She was trying to say that she can do universal policies and impact the Black community and close these type of gaps. That's what she wanted to say, but she didn't say that properly, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. But again, if you're going to come in with a universal policy and you're going to do something based around, as she spoke about in that video, something around trying to manipulate the numbers of who gets impacted by the policy. Let's say people making less than 100,000, or people who are in certain states, or people who are, having certain levels of student debt. If you go in and you try to do it that way, you're going to miss some Black folks who actually deserve this home ownership opportunity that don't have it, that don't meet a qualification. Because this is not about, when we get into the real nuts and bolts of how we got to Hispanics outnumbering us in the home ownership rate. When we get to that, you got to start thinking that this has been going on for too long. They've not been here except coming really in 1960s and forward. We've been here with the supposed opportunity to own things since the beginning of the 1900s, really. So where are we missing what's driving this? Why is the average 66 and we're only 44? Keep that in your mind. And then let's look at health. So we've looked at a couple different metrics. We looked at student loan debt. We looked at household wealth. We looked at home ownership. And now we're looking at health. And so there was a survey. American Progress published a report on it. They published a report. It was a couple years ago. It was from May of 2020. This data isn't really readily published as often as you like in a report like they did for 2020, but I know that these relative relationships are still holding true today. However, they published a report on health disparities by race and ethnicity, and roughly this is what we had as an outcome, right? They asked people, these people self-reported their health condition. 14% of Black people reported themselves as being in fair or poor health condition. And let me get myself off of here. 44% present themselves as being in fair or poor health condition. I mean, 14% Black folks. Only 8% of whites said that. 10% of Hispanics said it, and that put the average around 11. Again, there's this big gap between us and white folks. Remember, white folks are still the majority of the population. But then also keep in mind that the average, even if you just average everybody together, the average is still lower than us. So we have this gap. And believe me, even though you may say, well, Darville, it's not that big of a gap, it's not that big of a deal. No, you got to ask questions about this, because if you're going to ask someone, if someone's going to ask you for your vote, you should be asking for things that help you deal with these issues that we're seeing in these charts. And let's look at one more chart, and one that was such a hot button over the past years, especially during the pandemic. This last chart, racial hate crimes report. So this is 2022 data, and this came from usafacts.org, which sourced the official database from the federal government. And what we see here is Blacks just blowing away everything. The number of hate crimes reported as a victim. These are victims. And it doesn't seem like a lot, like only 3,500 across the entire country. Of course, these things are not being reported, y'all. Of course, people aren't really reporting these things. I would be believing that Asians probably, let me back out of that. I'm going to say that these are just not being reported at the right rates. So even though these numbers are low, the relationships still stand. It makes sense that we, being here so long in this country, would be the ones in our history in this country, especially, would be the ones bearing so much of the negative attacks based on our race alone. It makes sense. But of course, over the past few years, it's felt more like people are saying that it's everybody brown, it's everybody minority. And especially with the Asian hate crime bill, you would think that these folks was just getting humbled. Yes, there was an increase in hate crimes against Asians, no doubt. I am not here to deny that really happened, definitely. However, the truth is, when we talk about specificity, that's a great example of how a bill was developed. That Asian hate crime bill. Let me check that right there. Asian hate crime bill, right? Remember, that bill was rolled out and it had the specificity. It had that specificity that Kamala said she would never do for the Black community. I'm not going to do something here that's going to benefit just the Black community. Again, she really needs to watch her words, because what she said was kind of backwards and basically confusing, because you don't know what she meant, but you really do know what she meant. She means to not do anything for us. And so she's going to do not race-based, but class-based politics, which is not what we need. So, anywho, that's that. That is a reason why you and many of our younger people need to take a closer look at what is it that we are saying that we want? What is it that we are saying we're looking for in a candidate? If you're looking for in a candidate healthcare, you should be talking about the healthcare disparity for us, where we're reporting at a 3 to 4%, 5% higher rate that we are in poor health condition. You should be talking about the health conditions that our people in the southern states are facing in more rural areas, where when their house is next to a chemical plant that the city, the county, the state won't do anything about. There are countless of those. Let's not talk about the different things that are going on throughout Mississippi. If you're talking about healthcare, that's what we should be talking about, is those health disparities that have us at the lowest point in the hierarchy when it comes to health condition. If you're not asking for that specificity in healthcare changes, then you got to be blind to the data. You have to be willfully ignorant, because this is showing very clearly that we're well above average. So how are we going to kill that gap? How are we going to get on par with everyone else, so that the single rising tide will lift our boat, and we all can go together as one unified country up to the mountaintop, right? We can't go to the mountaintop if we're lagging behind everybody else, because as soon as they get there for the leading person, they're going to stop the bus. Right? If you think about it as one tide, as soon as the white people get there, or the average gets there, Black people still going to be left behind, because you allowed them to give you policies that did not address the gap. See, that's a problem. And again, if you come in here and you talk to me about college, and college still, despite, prevailing opinions, college still is a gateway to higher incomes and more social economic opportunities, because listen, even my sister told me when she's, let me not say that, but I will tell you that people have said to me, and I know for a fact, even in jobs still, despite the Elon Musks and the Googles of the world, even in some jobs still, and the task does not necessarily require a college degree, they still will prefer someone with a college degree. I'm not saying that the investment you have to pay for the degree is worth what they're asking you. I'm not telling you that they're asking for a fair amount. I'm telling you that going through the college experience and getting that education, it still pays in the field to have it. Doesn't necessarily pay you back fast enough, though. It just does make a difference. So if you talk about college being affordable, let's talk about how we have a ridiculous amount of debt compared to the average person with debt in college. If you're not talking about that gap, once again, I don't know what you're asking for, because if you ask for something that's universal, if you ask for something that's class-based based on your income level, then you're going to have a problem where this gap remains between us and the average, and we're just going to get ran away from. Because again, remember those same folks who got that $45,000 or $46,000 student loan debt that's not too far off from the black debt, they got a $250,000 house in terms of their equity anyway. So, I mean, why are we worried about everybody getting that? We should not be. We need to be worried about ourselves, especially because of what we've been through to build this country. Just yesterday, I was talking with Brother Stedman, and he's going to do a show on the Freedmen's Collective channel on YouTube. Go look it up, Freedmen's Collective. He's going to do a show that talks about what's happening with prisoners I think we talked about it a little bit, but it's just very serious what's happening with these prisoners in forced labor. This is still going on. Yeah, if you haven't watched the 14th, the movie, I don't know, is it the 13th, the movie? If you haven't watched that, you need to go watch the 13th and understand what's really going on with the prisons and this idea of ending slavery. It was just kind of rebadged, and now we got stuff by a new name going on, and it's our people who are going through it. This stuff is not over, y'all. And I think because a lot of us are growing up in nicer neighborhoods. Remember that 77% increase from 2019 to 2021 that we seen in median household wealth for blacks. It went from 15 to 27,000, according to that data. I'm not telling you that data is correct. I'm just talking about the relativity here. Remember, everything I'm speaking about has to do with relativity. Remember, that 77% is lulling people into believing that things are getting better. Well, they kind of are, but we're so far off the mark. It's like, oh, I'm not being shot 3 times a year. I'm only getting shot 1 time a year. Whereas conversely, on the other side, people are getting gold-plated chains and being treated to caviar. So we are happy that we're being shot less and bleeding less. But reality is we shouldn't be shot at all. And someone would say, well, we're making incremental improvements. Well, guess what? The incremental improvements will always be incremental unless you demand something specific and tangible and significant, which it can be done. And the incremental improvements will never get you near where you're supposed to be, because nobody is going to just give you something that's going to close the gap without you demanding it. That's why this stuff has not been changed in over 100 years. That's why we haven't seen significant improvement to the degree where we don't have to have the discussions about black men and women being shot down by police, about home ownership rates, about median wealth position, about income levels. We wouldn't be having those discussions anymore if these issues were actually closed. And so, since we're still having those discussions, that's what you should be grading your politicians on. What are you going to do to deal with these gaps that we have? Because these are systemic issues that this society and this country levied against this specific group of people to create this disparity. It is not happenstance. It is not a bunch of lazy people. And there are people who believe, well, y'all just lazy. You don't do this. You don't do that. Realize that if you even could say that there are some mental or psychological endemic occurring within the community that's driving behaviors that lead to poor economic outcomes, then you got to ask, well, where did this mental health condition come from that creates this cyclical problem? Same place I just told you everything else came from. It is not in a silo, people. I did a video some time ago. There's a doctor who spoke on his deep research around health disparities of the Black community. And he said very quickly, everything about the Black community that comes when it comes down to your physical health and well-being leads back to slavery. Everything negative about our community that we're dealing with, hypertension, heart disease, cancer rates, all of this stuff leads back to slavery in one way or another. Whether it be the fact that we're in the South and neighborhoods that don't have um, good environmental protection, or it be the hand-me-down traumas that come physically in our bodies that have been spoken about as that post-traumatic or that post-slavery post-traumatic slave disorder. These things that become part of our DNA and make us predisposed to different ailments just genetically. So when we talk about these things leading into these bad outcomes, we have to have a discussion about specifics, policies, and fixes. And I think that people just don't want to have that discussion. I think people rather go along to get along and just try to pull themselves up by their bootstraps because that's easier than looking a politician in their eye and saying, I'm not voting for you unless you're doing something for me, because I need something that has not been given to my people in over 100 years. And it's well past due. Whether that be specifically about how to afford higher education without us having to go into the same debt as everyone else, apparently, like the white folks are going to the same debt that we are, but they're able to pay it off faster. Why is that still a thing? We all know why these things are a thing. That's why we all are being we are guilty if we are not holding people accountable. So let's touch on a couple quick elements before we close out tonight. Couple quick important points. One important point that we do need to discuss is this concept that if you do not vote Biden, if you do not vote Democratic, and here again, I'm not here to sell you on who to vote for. I cannot emphasize that enough. But one important point that I have to make that I need people to remember is math. Math is what makes so many things in our society work. But you got to do math when it comes to politics and when it comes to the election system. If you don't do math, you are bound to get bamboozled. And that is the grand flimflam that we're talking about today, is the bamboozling of Black voters by using shills and in-community agents to make us believe that we are supposed to go with the least of two evils as the resort of being dealt bad cards year over year over year over year and not getting anything in recompense or repair. We're supposed to just keep going along to get along. This will not stop until you say, as a Black member of this community, that it must stop. And so in this math space, what you have to understand is the common adage that if you don't vote blue, you're voting red is a totally false statement. We start at the electoral college level, the highest level that actually gives out the votes that lead to the presidential candidate being selected, the president's election. When you go a level below that, you look at the popular votes in the different sectors in precincts and regions that end up lending to choosing which candidate is going to receive the electoral votes for that area or state. The popular vote is simply the number of people who vote for a candidate. And what you have to have is that you have more people voting for a candidate than the other candidates, period. It's not anything more complicated than that. So if you say, I'm going to vote for a third party candidate, for instance, or I'm going to write my name on the ballot in the presidential write-in section instead of voting for the two major party candidates. If you say something like that, you are not giving a vote to Biden. You are not giving a vote to Trump. The argument that comes after that is that, well, because you're not supporting Biden, you're making it easier for Trump to win. Again, I'm not telling you to vote for Trump. I'm telling you to take control and power of your vote, because our vote is our voice. And if you think that that is not true, then I don't know what you're going to do, because that's the only thing most of you even do is vote. And you don't get involved in any other meaningful way. So you better figure out what you're going to do with your vote to make it work, to fix these disparities I just showed you. So When you go third party candidate, for instance, non-Democrat, non-Republican, let's say Green Party or Libertarian or whatever, or even a write-in candidate like I spoke of, your vote goes to that person. It doesn't change the thing of Trump winning because he got your vote. It doesn't make it that Biden's going to lose because he didn't get your vote. The people who decide whether or not those particular candidates win are the ones who vote for those candidates. So the race between Biden and Trump is won or lost based on the people who vote for Biden and Trump. If you just think about it as a two-party system and nobody else matters, he can get 3 votes, Biden, and Trump can get 5 votes. And the millions of other people could just sit out of the election. And that would mean that the person with 5 votes wins. It's that simple. So if you don't vote for them, you're not voting for any of them. And I'm not telling you not to vote. What I am saying is that we need to wield our intentionality to demand that, hey, we need something to deal with these disparities before you start putting in all these class-based, across the board political solution. You have to get out of this mindset that this has to be them. The Democrats are banking on our ignorance and our pattern of behavior and our old guards that are getting paid in their back pockets, such as the lovely Reverend and many others from the NAACP, the Urban League, all those typical cats. Remember, those folks believe and are continuing to implore us to believe that we're just supposed to just take whatever we're offered and pick between the two of those and just take the thing that's least toxic. But I'm here to tell you, like me and the bro said in our prior video a couple years ago almost, it's good cop, bad cop, but it's the same cop car. It really is, y'all. It is good cop, bad cop, but it's the same cop car. We have to sit back and do this math to understand, if I don't vote for one of those folks, I'm not helping one or the other win, because there are all sorts of people who don't vote for anything at all. And I don't advocate not voting. I'm telling you, go to the voting booth and select somebody who says, I will do something specifically for Black people. And don't let people sit there and insult you on your own platforms like the Breakfast Club or even the Griot, like Kamala and Biden did, and then act like nothing. I mean, I guess this really shows how psychopathically damaged we've become if we sit here, get these type of things thrown at us, and then act like nothing when we get to the voting booth. Because again, we've been lulled, we've been miseducated, and our own people continue to perpetuate these bad, problematic activities in our community when it comes to politics. So listen, I'm going to land this ship because it's been about an hour. I'm going to start to pull this plane on down to the ground. But I do want to hear what anyone has to say if you want to call in. So I'm going to throw a number up just for those folks who might want to show some love and pop on in for us. It is the same number that we use for the Freeman Collective. So if you want to drop your voice in, we can definitely do that. But right now, critical thinking skills are required, y'all. We can't just do this. And so I'm going to do some more videos. I'm going to talk about specifically things we can do. But I also think that what you can do right now is be willing to stand up and have a conversation with folks around you and say, no, we don't have to give our vote to 2 people who are willingly telling us they're not going to do something for us. Everyone already knows Trump ain't going to do it as far as they're concerned. But he was willing to meet with Ice Cube when Biden's team wouldn't. I'm not saying that he was going to do something, but I'm saying, like, that's a lot better than what Biden did at that same time. The actions matter more than the words. And I think that because we're so threatened and there's such a visceral response that's different between how we perceive a Biden versus how we perceive a Trump. I think that visceral response drives people to the polls because there's this fear that Michelle Obama spoke about on CNN recently, this discomfort that's looming in our chest that if Trump were to get back in office, we don't know what's going to happen. But if I remember correctly, Black Lives Matter came into strong fruition under Democratic rule. I mean, under the Democrats in the White House. And I'm not here to say, listen, that, again, that the particularities of how it happened and the time transition from the last president to the next one and how it just spilled. I'm not here to tell y'all what is what. I'm telling you that I don't think that we can afford to continue to be emotionally unintelligent. That's what this is, emotionally unintelligent about our voting patterns. We have to demand real transformative policy that's specific to us, and we cannot allow people to run a flimflam and scare us into believing with lip service, with pandering, with distractions. Everyone from the celebrities to going to schools and doing 50th anniversary hip hop parties in your house, or all this nonsense. And we can look at other groups and see they're getting very specific things that are specifically for them, and they're being upheld by the government with the same specificity, whether they be Asian with that crime bill, the hate bill, or you talk about every state in the federal government support of Holocaust victims and their reparations needs for the damage that was done to them. And let's not even get into the specificity around supporting refugees from specific countries. There are a lot of little known things, like folks who come from Ukraine or folks who are potentially coming from the Gaza area due to the Hamas Israeli conflict. That stuff that they're going to get, if they get here, is going to be so specific you can't even put a sharp edge to it. It's going to be 4 squares in a cot on 3,000. So, and it's not going to be just a universal thing. Anywho, yeah, that's where we are, y'all. So think about that. Think about the critical thinking skills we are lacking in these discussions. You heard the man on the podcast. He really wasn't bothered with anything that deep. He was talking about character. Really, he was talking about things that were anti-Trump. Really, that's what was going on in his head when he talked about character. And then he was also talking about this idea that healthcare for him is really what he's concerned about. We all concerned about healthcare, bro. College, we all concerned about college, bro. Are you concerned about why Black men are incarcerated at the rates that they are specifically? Are you concerned about why you're more likely to be shot at in an officer involved stop? Are you concerned about any of that stuff specific to you that actually ends up costing you in a way that nobody else can make the gap up for? Not a lot of people are, and that's the problem. And we need to fix that. We need to fix that, and we need to vote accordingly, y'all, because there's no substitute for policy that's specific to a group that's harmed, because they were willing to put harms in place that harm the specific group, and they're willing to allow us to transition from de jure harms, the ones that were codified and written in law. They allowed the transition to occur that went to de facto. So they thought they did pacify us by ruling out or stopping some of the systemic harms that were codified on paper or allowed in fact. And now they just let the remnants, the accrued disadvantage, as Yvette Carnell says, they just allow that to kind of spill over and just remain in effect, burning us passively. It's kind of like nuclear waste. It's like we're infectious, right? It's like every year we have a new problem in our community that seems to just transfer from generation to generation. And that is a hell of a way to harm a people and also keep them harmed even beyond your wildest dreams. It's like beating up somebody and then just not taking them to the hospital. That's really what that is. Yeah, you kind of heal, but you're never the same. You don't have a cast to correct your bones. And then every now and then they do something where they make the other people faster, and you're just now getting up to where they used to be. You're never going to catch up to those people. You got to understand this. And that 77% I showed you is why so many people think we'll be all right, because they think that because things have improved for us and everybody, that we're closing the gap. We're not closing the gap, y'all. That's why we're still behind in everything else. All these improvements you claim we done had since even 2020, especially the cats in 2000. All these improvements you think we done had, even especially the cats from Atlanta. Now, they talk about Atlanta being a bastion. I'm not here to disrespect Atlanta, but I am saying that, listen, the national averages don't show that Atlanta is a lessons learned masterpiece that we're going to just draw from and use to solve all of our problems. It's just a place people go to see less of the problems that they felt in other places. That's just what it is. It's kind of escapism. So please keep that in mind. Atlanta's a good city. I love Detroit. Detroit's even more important to me. It's a bellwether, a true bellwether of not only the Black community's positionality, social and economically, but it's also a good bellwether for the whole country. Detroit is. So please understand that um, it is not just a thing that tells you that Black folks are not doing what they're supposed to do. That's not what this is. If anything, if you can say we're not doing what we're supposed to do, you got to ask is why are we so consistent with it? And most Black people you talk to will not tell you that we are over here throwing ourselves into the gutter. So anyway, y'all, that is going to do it for today. I appreciate you turning in. I want you all to feel empowered this election cycle. And I'm going to come back with another. I'm sorry. I think my neighbor's dog is out there. I'm going to come back with next another video. We're going to talk a little bit more specificity about some of the things that the Biden campaign. Again, this is not to shoot at Biden in terms of going to Trump. This is to tell you that these folks are pulling the flim-flam on us. It's just not. It's just a flim-flam. It's nothing real here. Hold on. Whole thing just with the trash. My bad. So let me show y'all what we're going to look at just quickly. The Biden Harris campaign achievements were a little bit of a nothing burger for the Black community. And this is what they're running around in South. This is what they ran around South Carolina and what they're going to do in your local community. This is what they're going to do. Let me just show you real quick because I don't even want to have the basics on our next conversation. Look at this fact sheet. Biden and Harris administration highlights accomplishments on the anniversary of historic executive order to advance effective, accountable policing and strength of public safety. So this is in 2022. Actually, sorry, I whipped too far, didn't I? Yeah, that's what happened. I'm on the wrong tab. I apologize. So here we are. Results for the American people, right? What did they get for results? Let's see here. We got 2 strongest years of job growth in history. But 2 years strongest job growth? Okay. That doesn't sound specific. 40 million borrowers stand to benefit from student loan debt relief, potentially. 11 million jobs created. We just talked about on the show the other day about jobs that migrants are taking and how dangerous they are. Tell me about these 11 million jobs you created. Are these jobs that people actually want to take? Because a lot of people ain't taking jobs and they talking about the labor market is tight and they saying there's a bunch of people unemployed and people ain't taking the jobs that are available. That's what's going on. Let's talk about what those jobs are. 100 actions to lower household energy costs, gas prices, record low unemployment rate for people with disabilities. Oh, that's specific. Where's the Black thing? Near a record low unemployment rate for African Americans. Near. Yeah, near record low. How'd you get there? How did that happen? Oh, I remember. My brother told me. He said people who are unemployed for too long, maybe about 3 years or so or more, maybe. I'm not sure of the number. If you're unemployed long enough, you just fall off the records. So, yeah, the unemployment rate may have dropped because you dropped a bunch of people from the data. So now it looks like less people are unemployed. They're not going to tell us that part. New manufacturing jobs. He's talking about unemployment again. $15 minimum wage for federal workers. I mean, that's federal workers, man. Vaccinated it. So this is what the thing is. One thing you can bet your money on is that these folks are not talking about anything specific to us. We got to hold them accountable to do that. So I do have one caller that's hopped on. So we're gonna try and take this one call and see. Oh, he just ran off. Caller just took off from us. Just ran off. Anywho, we're gonna get off this air after the technical glitch we just had. We're gonna get off of this here. And I appreciate all of y'all. So please take care. Please subscribe to my YouTube. I know we had a little bit of technical issue opening up today. I apologize about that. But we're going to come back with some more stuff, and we're going to continue talking about that and talking about actions. So until then, everyone, please take care.